Welcome to the Dr. Donna podcast, here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. Innovative, evidence-based recovery that helps to identify intergenerational trauma, allowing for freedom and embracement of the healing process. Today, episode 126, Generational Perspective Part 2, with special guest, me, Dave Croft. And now your host, Dr. Donna Bevan-Lee.
Now, Gen Zers talk about a fire hose of trauma. Oh, geez. You know, they have the pandemic, which, you know, we were talking about this before, and one of the things that you pointed out, which I think is really a good point, was that the pandemic brought us together a little bit like September 11th, because September 11th united the country. For
several years.
Yeah.
It's why George W. Bush got reelected.
Yes.
I mean, ultimately. It's why, Rudy Giuliani was a folk hero for a while.
He was. Yep. Yes, he was. And so that united the country for a while. Yep. And then it started, exploding again. And then the pandemic hit, and that united us for a while until masks were politicized.
Became a political statement, right?
And then, the vaccines became politicized. And so, it's like these Gen Zers were also, it's like they can point at the pandemic and still do. We're still in it, and they're starting to say, well, this is what it was like when I was trying to go to school during the pandemic, or, my family didn't agree with, vaccines. And so I didn't get vaccinated, and I went to college and I got COVID and I missed all my first year.
Right. And we're starting to see, the tribalism is getting, even more, it's no longer, an entire county, which all votes, and it's no longer a whole household, which believes a certain way. Now the tribal lines are being drawn up, within a floor plan within a house. Yeah. Because of the differences that are occurring, and based on perspective and based on experience.
Yes.
Somebody right now going through school has an entirely different scholastic experience than anybody who's ever taken school before. And so a solution from somebody a generation earlier is not going to work.
No.
Which is what we were saying again before we were talking, like nobody asked boomers' opinions. Like, how do you think we should solve climate change, right? Well, the solution that you might propose might work. I mean, we could talk about the fact that you're not even being asked. That's a whole other topic.
That's right.
But my solution to, for example, I, as a college teacher, because I teach music production at Full Sail University, in case you don't listen to, the Authentic Spiritual Journey, you don't have any idea who this Dave guy is. But
he's a great guy.
Well, thank you. I'm seeing students now who have spent the last 3 years, so arguably some of the most formative years of their adolescent time, freshman through senior high school, right? This is when you have your proms. This is when you go on your first date. This is when you get your car and your life. All these formative experiences have been informed through the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so I'm seeing students who, for the first time, they're just now having to sit in a classroom because they're not having Zoom classes. And so we're having a really hard time right now with our attendance policy because students have spent the last 3 years during an arguably the most difficult time in academia, I would say. We're having a tough time enforcing any attendance policy because students have not been held accountable to any kind of attendance because it's been Zoom. Doesn't matter. And even if it hasn't been Zoom, even there's been accommodations after accommodation after accommodation. Right. And so when it comes down to it, and like brass tacks, and it's like, hey, there is a right and there is a wrong answer here, and you got it wrong, so you lose points. But in the COVID era of let's just get through this, then like academic standards have been needing to take a backseat. Am I making any sense?
Yes. I've never thought of that, but wow.
Because what are you going to do? How are you going to fail a kid for PE when it's a Zoom class?
Right.
And that PE credit needs to translate in college. How are you going to fail somebody for a math class when the school systems are woefully understaffed and underprepared?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I teach at a school who has a very robust online delivery service. Mm-hmm. And even we felt some pains, but it was pretty effortless. I know some students, some band directing teachers. I said students. Uh-huh. I know some teachers here in the Orange County, Florida school system. They were literally told, here's a Zoom login, make it happen. That's you need to solve this problem, and we're going to resource you about as much as here's a Zoom link and go. And meanwhile, it's like, okay, wow. How do you have band? And so if a student doesn't have band, and how do you fail them for that? How do you fail somebody in band? Mm-hmm. And then they go to apply for college later, 3 years later, and they can't play. So now, and this isn't me because we don't have like a band program, but imagine I'm a band director in college and I see 40 new freshmen, none of whom can play up to the standards that just 4 years ago would have been the standard. So what are my options? My options are to either have no incoming class, have a freshman class of 5 people, or have a freshman class of 40 people, which I need because I need a marching band on field on Saturday.
Right. Yes.
And I lower my standards. I move the goalpost.
Wow.
And I think that's what's happening. And what's going to be really the doctoral thesis among all of this that psychologists and anthropologists are going to study is 20 years from now. How does this affect academia? How does it affect the sciences?
How do you affect the society?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, do you want your physician,
well,
your brain surgeon?
It's no wonder that like AI is a thing.
Yeah, right.
And it appeals to these students because they've just come out of 3 years of being accommodated to,
yes.
or accommodated.
Yes.
Because they've needed to, because it's been completely unprecedented.
That's right.
And so it's no wonder that they're flocking to AI tools to help them write papers, because nobody, from the teachers to the parents to the administration to the students, nobody was prepared to handle it.
Yes.
Beyond just survival, which is where we were. The first year of COVID, we were in survival mode.
Yep.
You know?
What do you think, being an educator, what do you think could change so that, we can kind of get back on track?
I think what needs to change is we need to recognize that this is what's happening. This is what has happened. It's nobody's fault, right? It's nobody's fault that Timmy hasn't gotten to the skill level that Bobby 4 years ago would have been at. That's not Timmy's fault.
Right.
But just because it's not his fault doesn't mean that we can't try to move the needle here. And so I think we need to slowly increase, right? We jumped into the cold ocean, but now we have to adjust out of it slowly, bring the temperature back up to get us back up to the standards, because it will be a domino effect, creating everything from the arts to the sciences. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I predict in another 15 to 20 years, we're going to see a stagnation of creativity, and we're going to see a stagnation as these students go out into the workforce, start having families, just like you talked about when the pandemic first hit. Mm-hmm. You talked about what's going to happen to the developmental arc of babies learning to talk when everybody has a mask on.
Right.
It's that, but on a vocational academic level.
Yes. Because, it's like they have, I'm still surprised when I see these little toddlers, because now they're toddling.
Yeah.
And they're 4 or 5. they don't smile. Usually, that age, they're laughing and giggling and smiling. To get a giggle out of these kids is hard work.
Yeah.
It doesn't come naturally to them because they weren't seeing it, so they weren't mirroring it.
But what's going to happen if educators and education doesn't try to get us back to where we were, then it's just going to be a continued snowball of accommodations that will only, that's only downward momentum.
Right.
You have to consciously pull out of that.
And then, so here's the thing. I was made aware of a teacher, and I don't need to say where this is. It isn't here, but I was made aware of a teacher who decided during the pandemic that, he would go back to school and get a teaching certificate, right? And so during the pandemic, you went to school and got a teaching certificate and, never went into a classroom.
Like he got certified to be a teacher, but had actually zero in-class experience.
Yes, right. And so was when, went into the classroom to try and teach and had so many accommodations because of the fact that we were in a pandemic that, even though they're a certified teacher, they spent all their time trying to find out, okay, now what do I do here? And what
They're
do
unequipped.
I do here?
Yep.
And how do I do this? And how do I do that? And the students are all just sitting there.
Yeah. And they're sitting there acting their age, right?
Yes,
this
they
is something
are.
they're acting their age. They're acting like 12-year-olds, and it's okay. 12-year-olds are going to act like 12-year-olds. Right. You're the adult in the room.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's, it'll be really, really fascinating to see what happens. But from an educational standpoint, I think we just need to try to get back to where we were, recognize that this has happened. It's nobody's fault. But we do need to work back toward it. It's going to take a while. It's going to take a long time.
It's going to take a while because, some of the skills that are taught kind of accidentally in the school is how to show up, how to be on time, how to deal with other people, how to accommodate yourself, how to adapt situations that, are unfamiliar to you. Every year you get a whole new group. You're a student with maybe, you'll probably have the same faces, but everyone looks different. Everyone is different. This kid's doing this now. And, it's like, it's a constant challenge going through, especially through middle school and high school. It's a constant challenge to just deal with the changes that are happening in life.
Yeah. And and we haven't even talked about the challenges from the educator standpoint.
Yeah.
I mean, like financial challenges, not having the adequate resources, not getting paid enough, dealing with parents' BS. I mean, parents who see that Timmy isn't performing.
Right.
And even though, there's might not be the great situation at home, or there might be complete apathy at home. Everybody's on their devices, whatever you want to scapegoat it at. Even though that's a thing, it falls down to the teacher.
Yes.
They're the ones. And let's not even talk about active shooter drills.
Oh,
I have had active shooter training at my college.
Wow.
I've had that. I know what to do if a shooter shows up in the building. I've had to watch terrifying videos, all of that stuff.
Wow.
Right. So that's not even talking about that. So what we're seeing in education, especially public education, is a mass exodus. And the teaching pool is getting smaller, which means bigger classes, which means more students are falling through the cracks and not getting resourced. Yeah. Sorry, sounds super despairy. And,
we're talking about, because that didn't happen in my generation.
Yep.
Right. In my generation, teachers were in control of their classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
If you, like I did, because I was like Oh, I was busy, let's just say. So if I say started the lawn on fire at school, the teachers, the administrators didn't get blamed for that.
Yep.
You know, it's like when I went home and my parents might have found out what I did, I was the one that had to deal with it.
Right.
My parents were the ones telling me how to deal with it and what my consequences were. They never dreamed of saying, well, the school hasn't trained her enough, or,
right.
She's acting out of blah, blah, blah. And so it's okay for her to do this. You fix it. That did not happen.
Yep. Of course, now the video of that would be online on TikTok or on Instagram before. Well, the video of you setting that the lawn on fire would be on TikTok before the administration even knew about it.
That's right. And it'd be streaming,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So, it's like we get, in my generation, the boomer generation, we had, you had to go to school. If you did not go to school and you didn't have a written notice, they had the truant officer come and pick you up.
It's like the cops showing up, man.
It was a cop.
Yeah.
They were, right? So the truant officer came wherever you were, picked you up, and you had to go to court, juvenile court.
Juvie. Yeah. Yep.
It's like now it's like nothing happens. Nothing happens. Right. There are absolutely no consequences. And, and a lot of so boomers are probably not teaching anymore.
No, they're probably not in administration anymore.
No, probably
the Gen Xers are now aging into administration.
Yes.
They're the ones, they've got their doctorates. They're the ones that are superintendents, principals, all of those things. It's my generation now.
Yes. And
which means it's the millennials who are the teachers.
That's right. And so the Gen Xers who are, aging into administration of all kinds, right, grew up with the big trauma that they were dealing with day in, day out was this existential, what you call existential dread.
Right.
So this was
undefined dread,
This undefined dread, which was, the Russians are coming.
Right.
And, they're going to kill us all or take over or whatever. How do you think that affects, say, somebody who is in charge of, is in administration for a school?
I don't know. I don't know how much the trauma would affect it, other than seeing, like being constantly aware of like litigation, constantly aware of the liability that the school system, the employees has in any given situation, which is, I think, why a lot of students aren't held accountable, right? Because on one hand, you have like, okay, so Timmy has this disorder, this disorder, this disorder. They're on this medication and everything else. There's all this and this terrible home life, broken family, whatever, so there's that.
Yeah.
Plus Timmy's acting up and set the lawn on fire. Right. So there are all of these things that administration has to take into consideration that a generation before was just like, Timmy set the lawn on fire. You go to court. Now it's like, Timmy set the lawn on fire, but like he gets abused at home. Right. So that has to be factored into it. And so I think that my generation has an awareness of that. Probably more so than the previous generation. What will be even more interesting is when millennials in another 15 years start aging into administration, and they're the ones running the schools, and then it's the Gen Zers who are the teachers, the boots on the ground. That's. I mean, we're coming from. The Gen Xers weren't the everybody gets a trophy generation. I think that would be the millennials, right?
Yes,
everybody gets a trophy.
Yes.
But it was largely the Gen Xers. Like, you can't blame millennials on that culture.
For getting a trophy all the time.
Right. Because it was the Gen Xers handing out the trophies, right? And the reason the Gen Xers were handing out the trophies is because they felt forgotten. They felt the apathy, and they felt like there was a general, nobody paid attention. So the reaction to that was to helicopter and overcorrect. So Timmy can't feel bad for losing a game, so we're going to give him a participation trophy. But it was my generation that came up with that.
Because when your generation felt bad for losing the game, what happened?
That's assuming A, that you did sports, or B, that your folks showed up.
So it was that they didn't show up.
Or they dropped you off, or whatever.
Nobody showed up because mom and dad were working.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't.
It's like the latchkey kid. It's like lost and forgotten.
Yeah, nobody showed up to my band This is not autobiographical. My parents came to everything,
yes,
so this is not. So I'm broad strokes here, but mom and dad didn't show up to my band concert because they had to work.
Yes,
I could say my father worked third shift, and he very rarely came to football games or to band concerts. My mom, on the other hand, was a band booster, and she did all of the band boostery things.
Right.
So that's what it was. The reaction was, I didn't get this, and so I'm going to make sure
I'm going to overdo it.
I'm going to overcorrect. Right. And I think every generation probably does that to some degree.
Well, if that absolutely was true for my parents' generation, because they raised most of us, they wanted our lives to be better than theirs.
That's right.
They wanted us to have more than they had. And guess what? Boomers have a generation now of hoarders.
Because they grew up as kids with very little, and their parents grew up like Depression era, kind of, you saved everything. Yes. And no, I can confirm my mom was a textbook hoarder, and I have to be super careful to shake that off.
Yeah. And, I do too, because my mother was a super hoarder. This is just a kind of a funny story, autobiographical. My mother's gone now, so. But when my mother had an entire trailer full of stuff that wasn't even, it was like across the creek from where they lived, because we had a ranch, right? And so there was a creek, and it was across the creek, but it sat over there, the biggest eyesore. Like, come on. And so when my parents went on their missions, because elderly people in Mormon land go on missions too, so they went on a mission while they were gone. My brother went out with his backhoe, dug the biggest hole you ever saw in your life, picked that sucker up and dropped it.
Just dropped it and covered it up. That's one way to do it.
They were like, where is everything?
Here's a shovel, Pop. Start digging, buddy.
Hey, he did that with all their old crap. There was old stuff my dad had. I mean, he just went.
I just think, like, okay, 1,000 years in the future, like, archaeologists are going to dig up, and what society, what anthropological finding are they going to assume about this era based off of, like, rusted cars in the middle? Like, what are they going to assume? That's funny.
We laughed and laughed. My parents, however, did not laugh.
Did not appreciate it, huh?
Funny. But we thought it was the greatest thing ever. And I thought, that's not going to happen to me.
Yeah.
So, like, when I have free time, which either I'm not doing this, I'm not working because I'm working a lot, or I'm not up in the mountains, I'm out there making sure in the garage. I say, I'm out there in the garage going through it again. And I don't have very much stuff.
Yeah.
Which I'm really happy about, right? Most of the stuff I have is art, and I've got to figure out what to do with that.
Well, there are worse kind of stuff. I mean, the stuff you don't want are, like, 5 years worth of old Reader's Digest episodes, right? Or issue, or shoes, or and that's where I think. Oh my! That is also autobiographical. My mom, she religiously kept on to those, and she would like put them on the shelf and everything.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Those
My
little
grandmother did that.
half-size magazines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I clearly remember Reader's Digest. But yeah, what's manifested for me is the hoarding gene.
Yeah.
Plus the 80s excess capitalism, materialism gene. That's not a healthy combination.
Oh yeah.
Because that could lead you to buy stuff you don't need.
Yeah.
And for me, it manifests in like instruments and sounds and stuff.
Wow.
But even like Shannon's mom will just buy shoes. Mm-hmm. And for me, I'm like, I wear like the same pair of shoes. I have three real pairs of, but she probably has 20 or 30 pairs of shoes, and each one has a purpose, and each one is consciously and purposefully bought. But yeah. But I do have to fight the hoarding. Not throwing away boxes or not putting things back or just the clutter gets in on you. Yep, I've absolutely inherited that. And Shannon has to keep checking me on it.
And, I think there is a generation where you don't, it's like stark bare, right? It's like there's nothing on the walls, nothing, it's like there's nothing in the house and on purpose. And I'm thinking that that's probably some kind of an extreme reaction to the hoarding thing.
Yeah. And it's a choice. Like a generation before, like the Silents didn't have bare houses by choice. It was because they just didn't have.
They had nothing.
Right, exactly. And they were, But the reaction to that, the Marie Kondos or whatever, Marie, you know who she is? She is like she's an organizational strategist. She had a show on Netflix or something.
Okay.
And she says, like, if you need to declutter, whatever it is, ask yourself, does it bring me joy? Right?
Yes.
Does this thing bring me joy? Have I used it in the last year? Does it bring me joy? And if not, then get rid of it. Donate it, give it to Goodwill. Or see, for me, I'm like, okay, I will do that. And then I'll have a bag of things that need to go to Goodwill. Where does that bag live? Does it live in the car to go to Goodwill? No, it lives in my closet.
That's really curious.
Yeah. Well, no, we have a bag right now that needs to go to Goodwill. Whoops.
Well, that's part of the climate issue too, right? Is that we have so much stuff. We've got so much stuff that when we start decluttering, our landfills just go.
It's got to go somewhere.
They just fill right up, and that's not good for the planet either.
No, well, throwing away batteries and electronics and
that's right. Into the landfill it goes.
Into the water table.
It's like that, and that was one of the things we were talking about. It's like we have some serious problems in this world, and if we don't take care of them, well, it's just not going to be good for us. And like what you were saying, these kids, these, Gen Zers, have been hit. I think this is true, with the biggest fire hose ever.
Absolutely.
And it's nonstop.
And social media exacerbates it.
And social media exacerbates it. And, when, like we were also talking about, when I needed to know something, whatever it was, either professionally or, academically, or just because I was real curious, I had to go to the library and look it up in a book, right? I had to read about it in a book, and I had to learn how to get the information that I needed by going through and reading a book or reading a chapter and, getting rid of the stuff that didn't matter, or to put it all together.
Thank you for listening to the Dr. Donna podcast here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. This channel is made possible because of listeners just like you. If you would like to support the channel with your tax-deductible contribution on an ongoing basis or through a one-time gift, head over to experienceofthesoul.com/support. The Dr. Donna podcast is copyright 2023, Dr. Donna Bevan-Lee, all rights reserved. Our theme music is composed by Dave Croft and used with permission. The Experience of the Soul podcast channel is a production of 818 Studios.
Hey friends, Sean here, your Experience of the Soul producer. I want to take a moment to tell you about something truly exciting. The SoulWorks online community, created by your host, Cynthia Alice Anderson, and available on the Mighty Networks app. If you're looking for a place where you can explore your spiritual path, connect with others, and grow in a meaningful way, then this is for you. SoulWorks is so much more than an online community. It's a safe, inclusive space for spiritual exploration, self-discovery, and personal transformation. Inside the community, you'll find everything from uplifting spiritual studies to soul-centered growth practices, meditations, affirmations, and so much more. It's a space where you'll always be supported and never judged. The best part, membership is free. You'll have access to powerful resources, inspiring content, and a supportive group of like-minded people who are all on their own unique spiritual journeys. And if you're ready to dive deeper, there are premium options available to enhance your experience with a live Monday night talk series and extended, deeper meditations. If you're seeking a place to connect, grow, and nurture your soul, we would love to have you join us in the SoulWorks community and see where this journey can take you. Visit my.soulworkscommunity.com today.